This is Imperialism number 6. We are a little bit more than halfway through going through imperialism, and we are getting into the United States trying to gain control of Puerto Rico, Cuba, and the Philippines, and kind of why those areas are important. Alright, so Puerto Rico is important for us maintaining a military presence in the Caribbean. It's also going to help us protect the Panama Canal that we are trying to build and in the process of building. So you got Cuba here. All right, Puerto Rico is right here. This would be Florida. I'm sorry, Cuba here, Florida here. This is Hispaniola. You got Haiti and the Dominican Republic, and then you got Puerto Rico is right here. These larger islands here, you can see it says Greater Antilles. That means big islands. Down here you have the smaller islands, Lesser Antilles. We've talked about that before. All right, so Puerto Rico, and again, we, the United States, are trying to take over. So this is what we have. We put them under military control at first until we set up a style of government under what is known as the 4-Acre Act. So again, we took over in 1899, and in 1900 we have something called the 4-Acre Act that ends the military rule, and it sets up a civil government in Puerto Rico that basically says the United States is in control. Well, in 1917, what we do is we grant U.S. citizenship to Puerto Ricans, and we make it known that they are a territory. Well, what we do in 1952, following World War II, is we establish them as a commonwealth with autonomy over internal affairs, which means we give them control so they have a little bit more power than what a state would, because they can deal with their own problems and their own affairs without having to go to the federal government. All right, so they're like a state, but not like a state. So in 1967, 1993, and 2012, the Puerto Ricans have voted to remain a commonwealth and not become a state of the U.S. of A. Earlier in a video, I said 94 and 2014. I was pretty darn close. It was 93 in 2012. So next is Cuba. Why do we want Cuba? Well, one, it can protect our businesses, and that's the main reason, is to protect our monetary investment there. We have sugar, tobacco, mining, and railroad industries, all there with American money. That's the main reason. Cuba was afraid that the United States was simply going to come in and take over Spain, and we were going to be that big brother type person that was there dominating all of their politics. So what we do is we try to make them feel a little bit better. We pass something called the Teller Amendment that says the Americans have no intention in taking over Cuba. And in 1898-99, the Treaty of Paris guaranteed them independence. However, here's the bad part, I guess. So the United States wins the war against Spain. Cuba's granted independence. However, Cuba becomes occupied by American troops. We also leave some of their Spanish officials in office. And if the Cubans protested against this, they become imprisoned or exiled, meaning we kick them out of their own country. All right? Now, because we were involved there, we can give Cubans food and clothing. We help their farmers put land back in cultivation. They're way behind us. They're about 50 years behind us. Even if you were to go there today, it would almost seem like it was 1970. All right, so they're still kind of behind us. We helped them organize elementary schools and educate their children. We improved their sanitation and medical research. We also eliminated yellow fever in Cuba. So that's a lot of the good stuff that happened. In 1900, we are helping Cuba create their own government and country. So we're going to help them write their own constitution. But we're going to have a little bit of a say in it that specifies their relationship with the United States. So this would be the equivalent of, sorry for giving you my age here, but you're in a relationship with somebody and they log into your Facebook account and put in a relationship, or it's complicated, or something like that. All right, so that's what's basically happening right now is the United States is hacking their Facebook account and making it seem like we're in some type of relationship with them. So we're going to encourage them to make a few agreements. So we've already talked about the Teller Amendment. Now this is the Platt Amendment. The Platt Amendment sets up how Cuba could be governed. And it's not Cuba writing this, it's the United States after Cuba has already supposed to have independence. So first, Cuba could make no treaties to limit independence. What that means is that Cuba couldn't sign a treaty with another country that gave that country power over Cuba. We don't want that to happen. We don't want another country going into Cuba and taking control. So that was number one. Number two, gives the U.S. the right to intervene in Cuban affairs. That's self-explanatory. We can get involved in their business. Number three, we don't want Cuba going into debt. Ask yourself, what would happen if Cuba went into debt? Well, the United States would probably be the one that would have to bail them out. And keep in mind, we have a lot of American businesses there, and it would be those businesses, whether it be an increase in taxes or whatever, that would have to pay to get Cuba out of debt. And then fourth, we could buy or lease land for a military base. And we do. It is called Guantanamo Bay, or they call it Gitmo. It is still there. So Cuba's a little upset about the Platt Amendment. They're outraged and they actually want to go to war. So this is what they do. They go to the governor's house and they start protesting. So what Cuba does is they ratify the Constitution with the Platt Amendment in it. So they realize that like this is what's going to happen and they just do it. What this makes them is it makes them an independent country, but basically they're a protectorate of the United States. It is a country who's partially controlled by a stronger power. All right, so they technically have independence, but not really, because we have some control over them. And then finally, we are into the Philippines here. The Filipinos wanted independence. Remember, we attacked them first because they wanted independence from Spain. We wanted to govern the islands. We wanted to take over the Philippines. Now, the leader of the Philippines, his name is Emilio Aguinaldo. You can relate him to Jose Marti, that was for Cuba at the beginning when Cuba was revolting against Spain. All right? So, he at first helped the United States when the U.S. was helping the Philippines against Spain. Now, he feels like the U.S. is basically just taking the same spot that Spain was in. So what he does is he leads a revolt against the United States, which became known as the Philippine-American War. I'm sure many of you didn't know that the United States went to war against the Philippines. So, what we do, and then this is what the book that we use for this, and you guys can see it on my website, it says that we forced Filipinos to live in designated zones where there was poor sanitation, starvation, and disease killed thousands of them. If you think back, this should sound a little familiar. Somebody else did this exact same thing, but we worded it a little bit different. This was the same practice that Spain had in Cuba. The designated zones, we called those concentration camps. People starved to death. Disease killed many of the people there because disease spreads rapidly in those confined spaces. Very similar to COVID-19 in the prisons going rampant. All right, good connection there for you. In the Philippines, you had African-American soldiers from the United States that would desert and go to the Filipino side. That was due to racial prejudice. So we've talked about that racism factor in the last chapter. And what you would have is you would have a lot of African-American soldiers who would go fight for the Philippines because they were sick of having so many people being racist to them. This took 3 years to stop the rebellion. We suppressed it, we won the war, and we set up a similar government to the one that was in Puerto Rico. So it wasn't like this huge war, it was just drawn out, all right? About 4,000 U.S. soldiers died, and then about 20,000 Filipinos died as a result of this. It cost $400 million. That's 20 times the price that we paid for the Philippines to Spain. We paid them money to gain access to the Philippines. And then in 1946, this was right after World War II, we grant independence to the Philippines on July 9th, 1946. All right, in the next video, we're going to get into China and the Chinese open door notes.